16th. We get a roll call, please.
Mr. Fetterling?
Yeah, we're here.
Mr. Washington?
Present.
Mr. Tholen? Ms. Polk?
Present.
Mr. Payton?
Present.
Ms. Peters?
Present.
Ms. Dunbar? Mr. Kinzinger?
Present.
Mr. Fairfield?
Present.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
Mr. Swanson?
Present.
Mr. Dunnell? Mr. Wheeler? Mr. Seroy?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Everyone got an email and or received the minutes. Anyone have any questions about the minutes? Because I didn't see. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'd like to check for public comment first. Is anyone here for public comment? I didn't get any sheets. A gentleman here. Are you here for public comment, sir? No. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Approval of minutes that we receive. Anyone have any deletes, changes, or anything they'd like to make, or someone like to make a motion to accept them? Ms. Peters, Mr. Smith. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Next up, be the building report. Mr. Skimmerhorn.
Around it. In your packet, you should have a building report for September 2019 and August 2019. In August, we issued permits for 1 new home. Total permits was 95, and we collected for the month $19,741 in total fees. For September, we also issued another new home for a total permits of 109, and we collected $25,934.
Anything else, though?
No, it's that's kind of the highlights of the 2 reports.
Okay. What's an increase over last year at this time?
In September, we had a slight increase. It was about a $2,000 increase from last September. August, we actually dropped. It was $40,000 last August. I believe that was the reason that one was so high is we had a large commercial permit last August.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Barring number, I'd accept a motion to Mr. Washington, number 13. Mr. Washington, a second by, okay, Ms. Pope. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Next up, Delbert has MS4 program discussion for us.
Yeah, as usual, I'm just asking if anyone has any stormwater MS4 program issues they'd like to bring to our attention.
Anyone have any problems with any drainage or water they'd like to discuss at this time, other than the normal floods we have? Okay. We don't have to approve that, right?
No.
Okay. Okay, next up for planning is the Wadley Sears barn request for a local historic landmark statute for a barn at 11553 West 8000 South Road in Herscher, Illinois, 60941, parcel number 14-22-09-300-04, application filed by Gregory and Denise Johansson. Do we have any discussion on anyone with that one? Michelle?
Yes, Michelle will
Number
be.
2.
Good morning. The Johanssons applied for the Sears barn. It's a kit barn. If you look in your packet, there's pictures explaining what the kit barn is. It was built in 1919. They're asking for local historic preservation status on this. The historic preservation met on October 8th for a public hearing and unanimously approved it. I think it was 5-0. And it was based on criteria C, which is the characteristic for the period.
Okay. That's all, Michelle?
Yeah, unless anybody has questions.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Michelle while she's here? Okay, barring none, I guess we should move on here to a zoning case.
Yeah.
I guess we have to approve that.
You'll need a vote.
We could just use a regular vote. So we got a motion to approve. Mr. Washington, Mr. Swanson, all in favor say aye. Aye, motion carries. Thank you. Next up is the zoning ordinance for ZBA case 19-3 is a request for a text amendment to the county code 121-295, sitting of a wind energy conservation system. The petition is Kankakee County. That's obviously Mr. Skimmerhorn here is going to tell us about that for today.
I will. It's a ZBA case 1913, not 03. But it's a text amendment to the county code for siting of wind energy conversion systems or commercial wind farms. The industry has steadily been growing to taller and more powerful, wait till that truck passes,
Yeah.
wind towers that allows them to generate the same amount of power using a smaller number of towers on any given wind farm. So to keep in line with the changing trends in the industry and trends that are happening around the state of Illinois, many other counties have also changed their wind farm ordinance to allow for taller towers. On the wrong direction. So we are recommending that our maximum tower height be increased from 499 feet to 699 feet. And to accompany that we increase our setbacks, which currently for setbacks from a participating dwelling was at 600 feet, and we'd like to change that to the greater of 1,000 feet or 1.5 times the tower height. And the setback from non-participating dwellings, that would be a dwelling on a property that is not participating in the wind farm. A minimum, we're going to change that from a distance of 1,200 feet to a minimum distance equal to the greater of 1,200 feet or 2 times the tower height. And those are the 3 changes to the ordinance that are being recommended. Zoning Board heard this at a hearing on the October 7th and voted 5-0 to approve, recommend the approval of the text amendment.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions for Delbert? No. Mr. Searay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delbert, if number 9.
That's close.
Thank you. Delbert, if we don't approve this today, would that still allow wind farms to be produced in Kankakee County?
Well, certainly, they would not be able to take advantage of the taller towers, or they would have to ask for a variance if they wanted taller towers
Okay.
than what the 499 would allow.
What stages would this board have to go through to have a moratorium on wind farms?
That would be a question for the state's attorney's office.
And the only reason I say that is I drive to the southwest every morning about 5:30 a.m. and the red flashing lights, there's 30 to 40 of them in the Iroquois County area, and you get about to the northern part of Shabans and there's one. So I'm assuming that's gonna be in our landscape in the next 5 to 10 years. So if we allow these types of wind farms to come into our area, and as somebody who's driving out of St. Anne, I'm in the eastern part of the county and I can see them. So I'm really not in favor of any wind farm variance or any wind farm in this area that, and it brings me back to what Mr. Kinzinger said last month about our, we have to have a consultant for energy. We're getting no benefit from this energy that's being farmed in our local area. So why should we help provide that energy if our energy costs are about the same?
Okay, I'd like Delbert to explain this for you. I can do it, but
Yeah,
let's
no,
Delbert do it. He's sitting here.
those are my few questions,
Yeah.
and we
Well,
can talk about this and whatever the committee. That's just my personal opinion on the whole wind farm issue.
Right.
And I don't, whatever the committee is for or against, I will back. But if we're bringing this in front of us for people to make taller, more powerful wind farms, I really don't want to
Well,
see it in our landscape.
I wouldn't call it more powerful wind farms, more powerful turbines
Yeah.
Right.
on top of them, which allows them to have less.
All this, guys,
You have 100 megawatt.
So looking at the map, that it gets back, brings it back to when Mr. Madison spoke at our last PZA meeting. I wondered why the long sales pitch. I mean, if this is just industry thing, why is he pitching us if there's not something for us to benefit from?
I don't think it was a sales pitch. I asked Mr. Madison to come here.
Well, it seemed like
this
a
is
sales
our
pitch.
text amendment, and it's really my job to
Right.
to
It seemed like a
put this
sales pitch to
forward.
me. I
but-
mean, I get a lot of salesmen that come at knocking at my door. It seemed like a sales pitch. And then you look at his map, and there's quite a bit of area in Illinois that he said that we're producing power for the eastern part of the country. Well, why don't they put them out there? There's a lot of wind next to the ocean. Why don't they put them there? So that's just my thoughts. I
Okay.
mean,
Well, there's a couple different things we have here. We have a tax on generated power. Delbert can give us the numbers. He'll talk about that. I also like to have him. I thought that Eric was coming to talk with you about assessments of the value of the wind farms or windmills and how much it will change and increase the height and if you have less of them and stuff. So he's not here right now. I thought he was coming. So, but Delbert can explain this. He'll
I can
give you a
explain
better
some
line
of
on
it.
that.
The reason Mr. Madsen was giving the presentations that he did is because I asked him to.
okay.
Okay. Somebody from the industry can better talk about what's happening in the industry than I ever could. So I asked him to come. But this is our text amendment that we're moving forward.
Who asked you to put the text amendment on if we've already had one?
Both current wind farms that are being proposed have asked for taller towers.
There we go. Now,
And that's
all right.
part of the industry trend. Because of the towers are getting more powerful.
Right.
Okay, back when our 2 wind farms that we currently have installed, about 1.5 megawatts was the size, the output of a tower. Now they're getting up into the 3, 4, and even 5 megawatt size. But in order to get there, they have to go taller. Now the benefit of going taller is that you need less towers to generate the same amount of energy. So if we had 100 towers out there at 1 megawatt apiece, to get that same power at 2 megawatts, we only need 50 towers. So there's not as many flashing lights on the landscape, not as many towers, not as much disruption. Okay, so there are less towers.
Okay. I'd like to
That's
go
one
along
of
with
the
Mr.
advantages.
Seroy on this question is really what benefit are the solar farms to us? I'm sure that's what
Solar
everybody's
farms or
thinking.
wind
I mean,
farms?
wind farms. I'm sorry. My brain is solar farm from the last couple of years. What advantage does a wind farm actually create for us? Why should we have it
You
here?
get property tax.
Property tax
dollars.
revenue.
We get a building
jobs.
permit fee. There are jobs involved, skilled jobs.
And there's tax on the power. So I don't know where we should go with this.
So there is.
Ron, Mr.
there's some
Kinzinger,
benefit.
you had something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sirois does bring up a question, and Dell kind of picked it up also. Am I still on?
Yeah.
Okay. Density. Just because we're going to 699, our ordinance does not limit the number of towers or the density per acre. Is that something we should consider? Because I too, with Mr. Sirois, look across the landscape and see all the dotted red lights, and it's disturbing and upsetting. And if we could limit the density so that in fact, when they say they're twice as powerful, we're gonna get half as many, it would sure make it more agreeable to me.
Okay, Delbert, you want to answer?
The number of towers and the size of a wind farm is dictated by the interconnect agreement with ComEd. The lines in which these are being fed into can only handle so much power.
Is that something we should be involved in looking at if
I
we're
don't
concerned
believe
about the
so.
countryside?
My opinion is no. That's dictated by ComEd.
Business tends to dictate based on
As
money
far
rather
as-
than other
As
issues.
far as density per acre, generally speaking, one tower takes up about an acre of ground, and because of setbacks, you need about 160 acres to have one tower, so the density isn't very dense from a land use standpoint, so I don't
Well,
know.
is it possible under our present regulation that we could have just as many towers as we have today, only taller and bigger?
I don't
further
believe
apart.
the interconnect
Just further
agreements will
apart.
allow
Or
that.
they will be further apart?
Yeah, because they have to fall. You got falls.
I do not believe the interconnect agreements would allow that, but Mr. Madsen is here, and he might be able to speak better to that than I could, if you'd like to hear from him.
Okay, you guys
Well,
want
one
to take a
other
minute to do that?
one other thing before Mr. Madison sells us on these towers again. On 24 between Chinook and Fairbury, they're building these towers, and they've had to widen 24 just and take a little ditch area out so that these towers can turn. Now, they used to bring the blades through downtown St. Anne where I live, and that would disrupt traffic a little bit. But these blades are so long, they're two-piece blades now. And I don't know if you guys seen any of these newer towers being built, but in between Chinoa and Fairbury, there are two being built, and it seems like a whole string of them are being built right now. You can see the first leg are up, and the equipment that's sitting next to these blades looks like tiny toys compared to the size of these things. So I'm just reluctant to support anything wind farm related right now.
Okay. Mr. Madison, you said was his name?
Yes.
He's not really on the agenda. If you feel as though you're being sold, I'd like to, comment on that. I don't know. I think Delbert asked him to come in to talk to us. If we want to put together a committee or something and talk about writing these guys out, solar or windmills out of here, that's possible too. But if you don't care for them and Mr. Kingston doesn't care for them, we can also vote against them when it's time for them to come in.
Whatever the committee.
But the thing is they will start the process and it will go through the zoning board or Delbert's planning department, then it'll go to the zoning board of appeals, then it comes here. It's kind of like already kind of,
Done.
processed out. The public hearing's been had and everything. So, and we're not really supposed to go to public hearings and say anything there at the meetings as far as I know. I have to check it out. But by the time it gets here, it's already pretty much, they're already drawing the thing. So if we want to make a change or you want to try to have an ordinance to not allow them, is the ordinance, make the ordinance so tough that they can't, come into it without several variances, then it'll slow the process. And then we'll get notified and we'll know what's going on, and there might be meetings beforehand and stuff. So,
There is no application for a wind farm currently.
yes,
What's on the table today is a change to our ordinance only.
to the existing ordinance that was written 10 years ago, roughly.
So there is no wind farm to approve or deny today.
If we update the ordinance, it just streamlines the process for them, and it's up to you guys how you want to do this.
I just like to get any other members of the committee's
Yeah.
opinion on this. I mean, I don't
Anyone
want
else
it to be
having a-
only my opinion.
Yeah, I'd have to say, Todd, I'm right along with you.
You know?
I was all for wind energy when I first started here because I did some research. I visited Benton. I went out and visited sites where they're being under construction when I was chairman of the zoning board of appeals. I did a lot of driving around, and it was like, yeah, let's go. Let's make a lot of power. They don't bother anybody and everything. But now, like you say, the more you see them, the more you don't like them. And I know from people that I talk to in my area and stuff that nobody really wants to see them in the distance. If they go between Grant Park and Mantino or north of Mantino or north of Grant Park, it's going to stop growth of the town completely. Kind of like the airport is kind of killing Peatone. Is that if there's a rumor out there that they're going to build a solar farm there, then that's going to kill new home construction there in the area. Factories and warehouses won't be able to be built because they're going to be that close together. So you have to build something in between the fall zones and stuff. They could totally eliminate the whole northwest area of Grant Park and the northeast area of Mantino. So that's something when it comes in that we can decide and we can go over, we can cover, and we can drive around and look and see. If we don't want it, then we can get together and vote no, to deny it.
This
at the
ordinance change is not approving any wind farm. What you're
Right.
doing is opening the door to allow this.
Right.
You'll still get the opportunity to decide on a case-by-case basis for each wind farm whether you want to allow it or not.
Yeah, then it would go into the findings of fact issues of special use
And each
permits.
zoning board of
and
appeals,
You'd
yeah.
have to have written proof of why you didn't want to, but at this stage, we wouldn't have to go into the findings of fact, right?
Nope,
If we.
There are
or
findings of fact for a text amendment.
For a
sure.
text amendment?
Sure.
but not here though.
Yes, there are finding of facts.
Okay.
For a text
Right.
amendment.
So if we tabled this
Yeah.
to another meeting so that we could maybe do some little better research, would that hold up your amendment? Would your amendment expire? Does this amendment expire at any time?
No.
Okay, so we don't have to do it today. If we have nothing on the table with applications, then it's really no sense in hurrying it through.
I'd like to go along with Mr. Zero here because we need to have some discussion here as a committee. So I'd like to kind of try to do it now, but we're only getting talk from a couple people. Mr. Washington looked like he had something he wanted to say at one time. Was there something you wanted to say, Mr. Washington?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We're sitting here deliberating on the future of this county. Is it on at all?
Yes, sir.
We're deliberating on the future of this county. Yet, I think it's taken too narrow a view of how and why we should permit or not permit things to go. We have not more or less a stagnant population. We have need for employment of all kinds, and we don't have the training that people need in order to get this employment. If we had these companies in some way, form, or fashion to work with the Alliance or someone of that sort to train people and make sure that they're first in line for these positions, I'm not sure that we need to be looking at restricting the kind of construction that we're talking about. It's already stated that those towers are going to enable the power companies to reduce the number of towers so that they can have produce the same amount of power. Am I correct? They can.
Yes, I mean, any given location can only feed so much power into the grid.
Right. So I have little objection to that. The lighting, well, I go on the country roads and I see the lighting. If you got a higher tower, you're going to have higher lighting in order to warn aircraft not to fly into that area. I think it's being a little too self-centered concerning these towers for us to have a major discussion about towers that don't even exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all you're doing now is setting the stage for an option.
Right.
Basically, we're just updating the ordinance here. Ms. Peters?
I agree. I feel like we're getting off task here. Dell has always been proactive,
Yes.
getting out in front of issues, and this is the second time in the last couple months that we've done this. So, or that he's brought it to us, and we get off topic. So, I don't have any problem with this ordinance at all. It's been approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals already. And they did talk about it. We will talk about wind farms individually, and then the neighbors can come in and talk about it. I don't want to get in the way of landowners' rights, so I like that he's putting down some rules ahead of time so that when the wind farms do come in and they're following these rules, we see this template being followed. And then they know what to do if they want to bring money into the county to build these. So we are getting money out of this. And I think that wind farms are much better to look at than those big warehouses that are just big blocks. I live near some, and I do not like them. There's constant noise there also. The trucks backing up, beep, beep, beep.
Middle of the night?
Multiple, all night long. It's so much nicer neighbors to be neighbors with wind farms than the big box warehouses. So that's just my opinion today. I would vote for the ordinance today because I don't think it stops anything. It's actually being proactive. Thank you, Del.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Fairfield?
I understand the problem with having wind farms, and sometimes I don't like seeing them either. But the thing is, we have an ordinance already, and if they come in and they put their wind farms in, it's whether it's going to be short ones or tall ones. And I'd rather have fewer short or tall ones than short ones. So I think we should go ahead and do this.
Okay, I'd like to mention something, Mr. Seaver. Sometimes being chairman, you don't get to say the things you want to say. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Okay. I understand where Mr. Searoy's coming from. I also I've been with Del for and planning staff here for 15 years, and he always tries, and I always believe in that we need to be ahead of the ball game. So if this is the update that's gonna last us a few years and we don't have to address it again until we actually see a windmill project come in, then I really think that we should probably go ahead and put this on the books so it's in place, and then we can get together when we have a project and we have a location and we have a population of the areas. Ms. Peters?
True, and our vote only moves it to the county board.
Yes.
So even though we pass it, it's not passed, it still
It's
has to
still-
go through the county board. So
Yes.
at that point, there'll be more discussion, I'm sure.
Okay?
You're just setting the maximum height. That does not mean new towers are gonna come in at that height.
Yes. That's just updating us to what happens in, 2019 and 2020. Mr. Kinzinger?
I've heard some things today that if we're looking at reviewing and changing this ordinance, that we might be able to incorporate in an ordinance with some findings of facts. One of them is density. One of them is how we might be able to use this power to advantages. And I think there's issues. I'm kind of in your corner. I'd like to see this tabled at least till our next meeting and look at a couple things.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, say aye. Sorry, we'll do a roll call. Mr. Washington wants a roll call vote, okay. Do a roll call vote for that.
To
It's
table.
To table it to
next month's
next
meeting.
month's meeting. I don't know when that would be. Delbert, you know when? that-
November 12th.
November 12th.
Oh, no,
Okay.
excuse me, that's county board.
It'd be the middle of the month after,
Yeah.
the third Wednesday.
20th, 21st.
Cause I'd like to see some, like Mr. Keenser said, some limitations on, they can be tall. We don't have any limits on how many they can be. And that would have to come in a special use permit.
Okay.
So,
Well, this is a zoning case,
It's a 20.
so the appropriate maneuver here would be to send it back to zoning board of appeals for further discussion.
with some of our thoughts,
Because we
I'll
cannot
make sure that I
introduce
get
new
that.
evidence in the planning and zoning meeting.
I'll make sure that I can attend that one, okay? So, motion to table it, and then we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Featherling?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
No.
Ms. Polk? Mr. Payton?
Yeah.
Ms. Peters?
No.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Yes.
Mr. Fairfield?
No.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Swanson?
Yes.
Mr. Seroy?
yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, gentlemen. So that'll be on our agenda for our next meeting. Go to the ZBA, put it in front of the ZBA before that, right, Delbert?
No, the motion was to table.
Oh, the table, okay.
Yep.
So
It's
it's
just
completely tabled. So would we have to have a motion to put it in front of back to the zoning board of appeals? Yes, right?
Yeah, if you want to send it back to the zoning board
On
with
what-
specific reasons that you want them to look at.
Yeah. Okay, so, we'll get a motion to, send it back to the zoning board of appeals, and then we'll list our questions here right now that we have, and have them review it and let them discuss it in a public hearing situation where could be people from the public that could hear about it because it's notified in the paper and stuff, so then we can come back in the 20th of November and discuss it then.
And how many towers to be allowed and
Yeah.
those types of things. We
Yeah.
have to have some kind of limitations.
Okay, so that's what you want as your number one, is how many towers in a wind farm?
That's what I would like to see,
Okay,
yes.
and then what other questions does anyone have? Mr. Kinzinger, you have anything else?
Well, it's not my original idea, but Mr. Seroy's broached on a subject that we should at least consider. ComEd, for instance, when they had their they used to provide municipalities with electric and certain amenities in order to entice them to approve. And I think that option should be looked at. If we have members, adjacent property owners that are impacted visually, then perhaps there's something that can be done for the county in terms of amenities.
Mhm. Well, something like that
Tower.
would normally be done at the special use permit
I
application
don't
stage.
know. I just
Yeah.
want, maybe there's something to be incorporated here that I don't know how it works.
Because the special use, you could tell them they can't run at night and they can only run them during the day and all kinds of
Well,
things like that. So,
I'm looking more at, like for the county government situation, maybe reduce power charges. for?
We already have that
ongoing-
in place on the ones that we have now.
Okay,
Del,
very good. I didn't know
Could you
that.
explain that, Del, real quick?
Well, I'm not up to speed on it, but I believe there is an agreement with one of the wind farms to provide power to
And
county
if we got
government.
one, then we ought to set it a precedent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that, Mr. Blair's here, is anything that you were aware of on that? Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Searay.
Just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback on what Mr. Kinzinger said, I know some of the municipalities in my two towns that I represent get free power, not at a reduced cost, but free power to a few buildings and a few things. I mean, is that not on the table for us to ask these wind farms that are generated? I mean, if there's chickens in the backyard, I'm not going to the store and buying eggs.
Mhm.
So I'm using the eggs out of my chickens. So, I mean, if we've got to look at these things in our backyard, why aren't we benefiting from some of the power that they're producing
Yes,
as a county?
okay, so that's things that,
Those are questions that I think we should ask.
Delbert, did you get those down? Or?
No, I did not. I should be able to get.
Kelly
all the
has
minutes,
written them
so.
down. Does anyone else have any questions they want the ZBA to discuss?
I believe that would be more of a negotiation between the developers
Yeah,
and not something you would put in your ordinance.
yeah, so that would be kind of thing at the time.
Right.
in mind.
So the developers would want to have the bigger turbines though, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the
They're asking for it.
negotiation, I guess, is started.
Okay,
No, because we're just looking at a text amendment now, not
Right,
This is
right.
not a negotiation for,
I just
With any
I just
developer.
proposed the question.
yeah. So what happens is when they come in right now and they ask for an application, Delbert gives them the proper paperwork and they go out the door and they have our old ordinance.
Okay,
And they come in and they go, wow, we can't have taller windmills. I guess we're gonna have to pay for the variance. It's $400. Basically, is that right, Delbert?
Yeah. $280.
$280 for that. That's all they have to pay to make it taller, and then it's got to go in front of the zoning board of appeals. Then it comes in the same procedure, just one thing added at the bottom of the
Right.
motion is all it is. So it really doesn't harm them at all to hold this. But if you want to hold it and get it right, and do some checking around, check with some other companies and see what they got. And that's what I'm going to do personally. Get online. You can find a lot of information and see what we can find out. And we'll take it at the next meeting on November 20th. Okay? That
Well, I
motion-
think that question about the negotiations would have to go to the state's attorney's office, because I'm not very comfortable with that at all.
negotiations.
The negotiating power.
Oh, that, like I said, that's
Power
something we would
rates.
do at a later
That is
date,
not-
other than the ordinance.
it's a good question to
I
ask.
would not put
Yeah.
that in the ordinance without state's attorney's review.
Right. And that's something that would be negotiated at the table, you know, as they come in. But like right now, as far as changing the ordinance, I think tabling it, if you want to discuss it some more, I'm more than happy to see us discuss everything we want to discuss here. Because a lot of times these meetings go and nobody discusses much and off they go. So I'm glad to hear some discussion. So do we need a motion to go back to the ZBA with that?
If you'd like to send it back to the zoning board, yes.
Okay, we need a motion to send it back. Mr. Seroy, Mr. Kinzinger, you second?
Yep.
Mr. Kinzinger, you second?
I'm not certain what the ZBA is gonna do.
Talk
Yeah.
about it some more, see what they
Well, if
think.
you're contemplating additional changes to the ordinance, it has to go before the zoning board of appeals to
Yeah,
do
okay.
so.
Let's have a first and a second to let the zoning board of appeals talk about this for another night. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Nay? One nay. Okay. Motion carries. Okay, Delbert, does anyone have, Mr. Wilson is here under old business. Well, he's not really old, but old business. Update us on a few things we have going on here with the grant situation. Come on up. That's 17, right?
That's all I'm saying.
I've been requested to stand more in the center of the room so everybody can see me. I'm going to read these for you. We had an event last Wednesday, October 9th, with the Illinois Department of Commerce and USDA Rural Development to discuss grant and loan opportunities to local jurisdictions and businesses. It was a relatively well-attended event. We had about 40 people there, representing a little over a dozen communities. In talking with the chairman, I think the goal is to have a regular exercise where we bring in the agencies, talk about what funds are available. Specifically, when we kind of postulated that event, it was surrounding, Bourbonnais applied for a CDBG grant through Department of Commerce for some stormwater work on Route 45, and the immediate response I got to everybody in the community was, there's no way Bourbonnais can qualify. And we found a way to make it so they could qualify. I gave the information to Mr. Van Mill, and he was able to move forward on the grant, bringing those opportunities forward to the jurisdictions, trying to bring grant dollars in. One of the things that happened during that meeting, at noon on Wednesday, Department of Commerce issued their economic plan. So I just want to briefly, I can share you a link on it, but I just want to cover agribusiness, agritech, energy, information technology, life sciences and healthcare, manufacturing, and transportation and logistics are the main industries that Illinois will be focusing on for the next 5 years. So we talked about today energy and transportation. So when we talk about warehousing, logistics, transportation exercises, or energy, these are initiatives that the Illinois Department of Commerce and the governor have identified as priority areas, so creating jobs in those market segments. So I don't know if we'll see more wind farms or less wind farms, but just keep in mind that these are going to be areas where we're going to be focused. And when we say energy, it's coal, well, it's not coal, it's gas, so turbine built, but it's also alternative energy. So likely we'll see more of it, warehousing the same way, and we fit in, we mesh into those market segments pretty well in Kankakee County. So we likely will see some initiatives coming down the pike for grant funds or loan funds to support business and job creation in those areas, training, OJT. So as we bring the state in, as we bring the feds in more often, they should, in that $2 billion tranche that Illinois Department of Commerce received under the capital bill over the next 5 or 6 years, they will be making funds available for that. So if there are any specific programs that the county board wants to see, certainly let myself or let the chairman know. Let Mr. Lear know as we talk about from a legislative effort, because the grant funds are going to be available, but they haven't created the programs yet. So they're soliciting from the jurisdictions to say where should these dollars be spent in Illinois. So keep that in mind. Always happy to help on those initiatives, but also just to, if Bourbonnais or Bradley or Kankakee or any of the jurisdictions get money, it's good for Kankakee County. So we'll keep an eye out. I'd like to have at least 2 a year. So this was a fairly successful first one. I'll probably look to have maybe more than 2 in the first year, but then just kind of regularly bringing the agencies in. I just wanted to give an update on what we were doing.
Okay,
So.
Mr. Wilson, real quick, what kind of amounts are you talking about on the grants that are available, dollars wise?
So the Bourbonnais just applied for $500,000 of a $1.1 million project. So you can apply for up to $25,000 per job created. So Bourbonnais and Riverside connected for Burns Road and Route 45 for a new expansion up there. The company commits to 20 jobs, $25,000 a job. They get a $500,000 grant to move forward on the project. It's just things like that where whether Bourbonnais, the residents of Bourbonnais may or may not qualify, doesn't matter. It's whether or not the jobs you're creating qualify.
Okay. My question about that is I read something about that online, one of the local news feeds I get online. Is that money, when you say jobs, do you mean construction jobs to build them, or you mean permanent jobs?
So FTE. So this is permanent full-time jobs. So the company will have to commit to hiring for a certain period of time.
Okay.
The grant window is usually about 2 years, but if they build a new office facility, we know they'll be hiring people, and likely they'll hire more than 20 people, but they commit to that number on behalf of the village so they can receive the grant.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Anybody have any questions for Mr. Wilson? None at all? He came all the way over here from across the street?
Oh, I was downstairs. I only came up 2 floors. It wasn't too bad, so thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any new business for anybody? Delbert? Nothing at all? Okay, so I have a motion to adjourn. Okay. All right. New business.
I just wanted to announce to everybody, since we give regular updates for World Transit, is that we just received it. We took delivery of a new super medium yesterday, so we're happy about super medium duty. So it's a 26 passenger bus.
Oh,
I
nice.
just wanted to announce to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on our new business? Barring none, I entertain a motion to adjourn. Good day. See you all on November across the street.